back to Writing Off the Deep End. Today we're going to be talking about short fiction.
Yeah, so you've done more of that than I have, but I think I might be able to speak to some of it.
Have you written some short fiction? I know you've written shorter. I mean, not all of them are 15-book epics. There's been some novellas.
When I was a younger man, I tended to write short fiction, but I mean, I think my strengths are the sort of the larger vision of things rather than the micro. And short stories is such a micro form. You need to pay attention to all of the little things in order to make it pull together. And I can do that, but it's not. I don't get as much enjoyment out of that as doing the novel with a broader canvas. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Were the stories that you were writing in short form, were they a different kind of story? What kind of story?
So I tend to be science fiction, although I have done, again, I was doing some of the historical fiction similar to what I've been doing more recently on Second World War. So I did a few short stories about that period, but mostly it's science fiction that I've done. And the ones I got one published in a Quebec science fiction journal, magazine.
Yeah.
That was, it's now, I think it's stopped publishing. It is a thing called Imagine.
Yeah.
And the other one that I got published, well, it was co-written with my wife, science fiction, but it was read on CBC radio. So it was a short story, but it was read on the radio instead of being published in a print form.
So I think we've hit on one of the big advantages of the form is that short stories are often a place of really dynamic interaction. You know, there's magazines coming out by very new writers and you're seeing other people's short stories and the cycle of them is faster or they get on the radio. And so because they're out there in a dynamic way that a novel, which has a certain inertia to it, isn't.
Well, tell me about your experience maybe with it.
When I have an idea for a story, that's how they come to me. You have an idea for a story. And I had to sort of learn to recognize what length that idea would turn into. So I really do believe you don't sit down and you say, today I want to write a novel, today I want to write a short story. Well, maybe you do. But it's more that you want to write a story about this or that. You have your idea. And the skill is to look at that and say, oh yeah, that's going to be a novella. Or that's going to be a short story. That will be a 2,000-word one. That will be a 6,000-word one.
Because of course it matters when you're submitting to a location, a printing venue where it has a limit on the number of words, and then you have to fit your story to the requirement, right?
I really do think you have to. I look at those and you have to choose the story. You can't take any old story and squeeze it into a 3,000-word box. But sometimes you have a 3,000-word idea, and that's really magical when you think, oh, that will be
because
perfect.
I have submitted stories to contests where you had a set number of words, and then I had to write for that set number of words.
Yeah.
Right? So that's.
Did you enjoy that constraint?
I did. I always like constraints because writing has.
Yeah.
I mean, when you start to write, you can write absolutely anything, and that's hard. But if you have some constraints, it helps you focus on what you're going to do. So I like the constraints.
Absolutely. They're a kind of scaffolding that help me prop up my structure until it's done, and then you can.
So you obviously enjoy writing short fiction.
I do. Yeah. There are a lot of stories that aren't novels, that aren't, that don't need to be stretched out that much, that are just a little flash of something lovely or intense or something of that kind. And for that, the short story just holds it perfectly. For me, poetry is the most extremely condensed writing form. And in that case, you do get something very much pure emotion and sensation. And then a short story lets you unpack that a little more and into a linear narrative. And then a novel is letting you unpack it still further. And so it has less of that sensual and emotional intensity. And it has to, because you'll wear your reader out. You'll exhaust your reader if you're keeping it at a high pitch the entire time.
And so you write for journals, or do you write for the journal, or do you write a story and then look for a journal?
I often have something specific in mind, although it's a mistake perhaps to write too narrowly for a journal, because then the bane of the writer's existence, the rejection letter,
Right, exactly.
9 times out of 10, or maybe 19 times out of 20, that story will then be rejected, and then you have to retool it and fit it up for a different publishing avenue,
Right.
and try your luck again. So, but that's good in its way. Sending it out, getting it back, being able to reflect on it 6 months later and see what that story now means for you, and changing it again, all of that makes the story better and richer.
So do you have any idea how many short stories you've published?
Oh, I'd say about 12 or 14.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's quite a few. I mean,
over the last 12 or 14 years.
Oh,
So it's
okay.
not a... No. Yeah, my first one came out in 2007 or something like that during my undergrad days. And I don't know what I'd think if I went back and read it now, but it was all these things we're talking about that short stories can do. It was impressionistic. It was a snapshot kind of glimpse, and back then I was always trying to make my writing mysterious, something I've gotten over. So it was a snapshot glimpse into something happening with a vague sense of vaster currents.
Okay.
Perhaps a novel's worth of vaster currents, but what I got was that little snapshot.
Because I sometimes write short stories a little bit like I do the 3-day novel for novels, that is to say, or a contest. I use the opportunity of the contest to work out something that I sort of have vaguely in mind, but I didn't know exactly how to do it.
Yeah.
And so I'll use as sort of a contest for a short story, and I'll think, what are my current different efforts going on? There's a story that I haven't really understood, and then use it to flesh out that story in a short story context.
Okay.
But it's within the larger framework of something else that's going on, right?
That's interesting. So have these short stories often then been incorporated
sometimes
into the
they have.
larger
So
work?
I wrote one short story. It was for a CBC contest, short story contest, in my science fiction world.
Yeah.
That then became incorporated into actually one of the rewrites that I'm currently doing for one of the novels in the series. So I have used them that way as a kind of fodder for the novels.
Now, that was done quite intentionally to be part of an existing world. Have you ever written a short story and then later looked at it and meant for it to be a short story?
And then worked it out.
Later realized that there was a novel's worth of
I've done that
story
too.
in it.
Yeah.
I remember learning in undergraduate, or maybe even in high school, about, in those days, I don't know if they still teach it this way, but they said that all short stories lead to an epiphany, and you would read James Joyce and something from the Dubliners, I'm sure, and the characters would be wandering around doing things, and then at the end they would realize something. And then I started to write my own short stories, and there wasn't always an epiphany.
No.
I wonder, has that structure, which I'm sure they also taught?
I do tend to do that. This is what I meant by this sort of emotional resolution, that there's sort of some kind of an enigma or a dilemma that's posed, and then there's some sense of resolution of that enigma at the end of the story. But I have written other things and that aren't like that, and I'm probably drawn more to writing that's less cathartic in that way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm more interested now in varying up the form, like breaking up the writing so it's more fragmented.
Yeah.
And so it's a bit more experimental as a writing style.
And I will say, for short stories, that's another advantage of short stories. So being experimental with your form is asking something of the reader. The reader has to put in some extra effort. And if you ask them to do that over a 300-page novel, they might become so exhausted that they throw it across the room. But in a short story, you've got their attention. You're just asking them for an hour of their life, perhaps, maybe even less. And so you can ask them to put in that extra effort to experience something new to them, something difficult.
So have you done that too, or?
Oh, I might be a bit of a conventional writer, although the last short story I wrote, I was staying with another friend of mine who is a writer, and we said, let's exchange our most latest writing and give each other feedback. And she got it, and she was looking at it on her screen, and she gives me this look, and she said, I didn't sign up for second person, Mary. So I'd written it in second person. And I don't think I'd have the nerve to write a second person novel, although many writers have done it, and Kay Jemison did recently, and they did it well, but maybe I can work up to that.
Yeah, maybe.
But for a short story, this was under 3,000 words. This was 2,500 words, and I think that even your pickiest reader can set aside their expectations and read a second person story.
I remember reading one of your stories, and it had a quite subtle conclusion. I can't remember which one it was now, but
Well, good. Subtlety. Although I hope it was also clear. I think there's always that tension as writers that we want to be subtle, but at a certain point we realize that we also have to be clear.
Yeah, because sometimes you read stories, I'm not saying yours, but somebody else's, and you get to the end and you think, I really don't know what they were trying to tell me.
And not in a good way. Yeah. All right.
So thank you very much for listening to this video blog, and next time we're going to talk about dramatic forms.
That could be theatre, it could be opera, or really anything that's read aloud.
Right.
So don't forget to subscribe, and thank you for watching.
See you next time.